Oh no, maybe we won't talk about Alan Watts.
We don't have to. So, let's see. So do we invent the world outside of us kind of in our brains? Or are we interacting with something real?
I think that's a tricky question to answer because I do believe that our reality is made up of our perceptions.
Yeah.
But I mean, real things do exist. I mean, we can touch and smell, and we have senses, and there are real things that exist in the world that we interact with and that interact with us that is more tangible. But I do think that the real world has kind of everyone has a lens, whether they acknowledge it or not, and through that lens, there is a different reality that is created based in the real tangible stuff, if that makes sense.
It's based in the real stuff, but it's different than someone else. Someone could see the same thing, but see it differently.
We can all see this black cloth here, but what I see and perceive as the color black may be different from your perception of the color black. Just to use a really, maybe not the best example, but we all still agree that this is a black tablecloth. We can all see that, but there's no way of ever knowing what someone else's perception looks like through their eyes.
So there's just something outside of everyone that we have some agreement on because it's like a common space in which we live.
Mm-hmm. I think it's more for ease of communication as well.
But there's no guarantee that the details of those realities are the same.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay, but there's some kind of common ground because we exist in the same space.
Yes.
You wouldn't say another person is just a figment of your perception and doesn't have
because it's a real person.
Okay.
But everyone's perception of that person is going to be their own perception, and that's going to create their own reality. And there's no way to live in someone else's reality. We can put ourselves in someone else's shoes and try and empathize with people, but there's no way to actually get a hold of that.
Okay. So if we're trying to speak about what is most real or what sits at what would be considered the bottom of reality, would consciousness or that sort of conscious perspective of the individual, would that be the foundation of reality, or are we instead sort of made up of the same material that we see in a way where that material would be at the foundation?
I mean, at the end of the day, we're all carbon-based life forms. There is a basis of things that make us up, but then when you get into the area of consciousness and trying to define that, or even where consciousness or sentience, something like that comes from, I don't think that comes from the chemical makeup or the composition of our bodies. That's something internal. That is the goal of every philosopher, right? Is what is consciousness? How can we define it, or where does it come from? What makes something sentient versus not sentient? There's the argument of animal experimentation and the morals and ethics of that, because how much do they know and experience? We only know what we can observe from animals. They can't tell us oh, that hurts or that is uncomfortable and different things. They have body language that can communicate some of it, but at the end of the day, there's no way to know where that consciousness is actually at or what level it's at.
For animals in particular. But we can maybe infer their level based on maybe certain experimentation. I can think off the top of my head different experiments on chimpanzees, for example, that try to analyze what level of self-awareness they might have, or how in what way are they social? Do they see other animals as sentient like themselves or something? And so, but they're obviously less conscious than humans, right? Or
I don't know if conscious. I don't know if conscious is the right word. I would define that more as intelligence.
Okay.
They don't have the same level of intelligence, but they make tools and stuff, right?
Okay.
And just like humans, so there is a level of intelligence there, but the consciousness is the tricky part to pin down.
Okay, so how do we differentiate intelligence from level of consciousness?
I think intelligence is more of a thing created by civilization. Like we created civilization because we are intelligent. We've developed tools. We've developed different ways of communicating, reading, writing, building stuff, which is further than any other animal we can see has come, like intelligence-wise. So on that scale.
So intelligence is primarily characterized by the capability to manipulate the material world to one's own ends, something like that.
I think that's a good way to put it, yeah.
And that's different than consciousness, because consciousness is...
I would say consciousness is more of like a self-awareness and like
Okay.
an awareness of like other people are also consciousness is being conscious of consciousness. It's like a meta kind of thing.
Okay, so in that sense, like humans are, by your estimation, more intelligent than animals, and like chimpanzees, kangaroos or whatever. Are we more conscious than them, or is that just sort of an unprovable question?
I think that's the that's the challenge of philosophy. It's like, where do you draw that line of like consciousness? And I mean, how do we even define like what is consciousness? Like what even is that besides just being aware, like having that self-awareness?
Yeah, that word has been oversaturated in the modern era,
Yes.
for sure. And I was using it in some sense to refer to a kind of self-awareness, to a kind of ability to see one's own existence. I'm sure you can experience it even now, like this ability to almost observe one's experience.
Like a third person. Like you can
Yeah.
put yourself in a third person kind of perspective.
Like even just the sensation of existence itself, there's this sort of perception. You're perceiving things that are important to you in the fovea of your vision, the center of your vision, and then outside there's a sort of peripheral. There's this thing that we exist as and exist in, and it's what makes up our entire existence. Like that, we can't think of anything else. We can't imagine anything else because this is our perspective. Do you think that requires a level of intelligence to get to that point where you can say something like what I just said?
I think it's the opposite. I think intelligence follows consciousness. I think consciousness would have to come first, and you would have to become aware, like you said, that you exist in some sort of world before you can even begin to like, okay, how can I now manipulate that world? And that's where intelligence comes in. So the consciousness is becoming aware, and if you want to try and like define levels, is like how aware are you? Like a dog, or let's say a fish, even better example, a fish in a fish tank. His whole world is the fish tank. As far as we know, and I may be wrong, I haven't ever talked to a goldfish, but to that fish, as far as we can tell, that fish tank is its whole world, and it doesn't know anything outside of that. And I would say that is like a limited version of consciousness, where the goldfish might be aware of itself and its environment, but it's not aware that the fish tank is existing in a larger world around it. So on Earth, it doesn't have a concept of Earth. It doesn't have a concept of its own species and I think that is also where intelligence follows consciousness, because then as conscious beings, as humans, we've developed classifications and categories for different things to kind of help us organize the world, and that's intelligence, I think, following the conscious awareness.
So let me postulate this based on what you're saying. So intelligence is the ability to create functional models based on the degree that we are exposed to reality and the expanse of reality that we can see. And the expanse of reality that we can see is then dictated by our level of consciousness. And if you're more conscious, you can see reality in a greater fullness.
Yes. Like I said, that third person perspective.
And because of that, it maybe allows you to create more sophisticated models in order to exhibit power or manipulate the reality around you.
Yeah, or even just as simply as like classifying and categorizing things, just for ease of like communication and understanding.
For ease of communication between other beings that are similar to you.
And I think understanding like the world around us, I think that's important for like building that consciousness as we
Okay.
back in the day people thought Earth was flat. They didn't
Yeah.
even know we'd like discovered America.
Well, do you
That's
know
like
what's really interesting? Sorry, go ahead.
no, that's fine. That was it.
Okay. What's really interesting about that to me, with just based on what I've been, the kind of scientific work I've been interacting with recently, and I have to leave pretty soon, but that seems to resemble the difference between the left and the right hemisphere in some sense of the brain. How the left hemisphere seems to be specialized in abstracting and creating models of reality, and the right hemisphere seems to be specialized in trying to interact with the actual reality. And that dichotomy between those asymmetrical hemispheres is found even in that squirrel right there. Like it's found in every animal.
Yeah, with the brain essentially.
Every animal with a brain. Yeah, not trees, obviously. And so, I guess how does that surprise you, or does that just make perfect sense?
I don't know. I mean, it depends on how heavily you want to lean on like evolution being the path of how we got to the point where we're at today.
Okay.
As we evolve and learn more things about the world we live in, as like that consciousness grows, like I said, we figured out, we live on a round planet and there's other planets in the solar system. That knowledge is expanding. There's like a component of evolution that's going along with that maybe the logical side is developing more as we're learning more about the world, because there's more things we need to categorize and classify and define, and there's more things we need to understand. So maybe the brain is trying to keep up as our consciousness or as our world is expanding. It's just keeping up with making sense of what we're learning. The brain is constantly, the human brain at least, is constantly trying to organize and make sense of everything you see all the time throughout your whole day.
Yeah.
So it might be a product of that.
Okay. And do you think that process of modeling is just the real bread and butter of what it means to be a human? Or is it more to do with the level of consciousness that we have?
Well, that's hard, because like I said in the beginning, we have no way of actually knowing the level of consciousness that exists like in other animals outside of ourselves. So I think that's kind of a hard question to answer, is like what it means to be conscious as a human, because we don't understand any other type of consciousness.
We can't compare it with anything else.
There's no other way we can get a different perspective besides the human perspective that you have.
Well, that's a perfectly reasonable answer. I think I have to leave. What time is it?
Yeah.